What's up everyone? Alex here. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir has been in my backlog for quite some time now, and even longer still if you consider that I have a physical copy of the original PS2 game. I found it strange that I didn't jump into it right away, given that I enjoyed Muramasa and Dragon's Crown immensely. I'm thankful that I finally did, because what I found was truly a timeless classic that fans of action RPGs should really look into. In fact, I'll do you one better. I'll even go so far as to say that it's probably my favorite action RPG of recent memory. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir is a Norse-themed beat-em-up style action RPG and is an enhanced remaster of the original PS2 game. Unlike most remasters, the original Odin Sphere can also be played from the title screen, complete with several modifiers, including a 4x3 mode that emulates the original release's aspect ratio. The story has you follow the lives of 5 different characters, whose fates are intertwined as they prevent the coming of Ragnarok, the Norse Armageddon. From the Valkyrie Gwendolyn to the scarlet-robed Velvet, each character features a unique style of play, and mastering these different styles of combat is at the heart of what makes Odin Sphere Leifthrasir so endearing to me. Since the original Odin Sphere is packed in with Leifthrasir, I think it's important to note that there was a difference in the design ethos between the original and its remaster. At the time of the original game's development, Odin Sphere was planned to be a spiritual successor to Vanillaware's earlier title, Princess Crown, which was a side-scrolling action RPG released in Japan on the Sega Saturn. However, Vanillaware wouldn't be known for their fast-paced beat-em-up style action gameplay until the release of Muramasa the Demon Blade on the Wii, which would propel them to release their critically acclaimed Dragon's Crown soon after. When Atlus approached Vanillaware to make a sequel to Dragon's Crown, a desire to revisit Odin Sphere came up, and both parties quickly agreed to work on this project. The resulting game is a complete rework of all of Odin Sphere's systems, combat, alchemy, level design, and progression, which turns Leifthrasir into a different game altogether, albeit with the same story and some improvements to the game's sights and sounds. It's because of Vanillaware's experience with Muramasa and Dragon's Crown that Leifthrasir's combat feels much more liberating compared to the original, leading to crazy multi-hit combos that'll let you juggle and continuously apply pressure to your enemies. To complement these changes, a dodge button was added so you can quickly maneuver around opponents, allowing you to continue chaining your combos. These combat system refinements are accompanied by a brand new skill shortcut system where you can map your character's skills onto a direction and a button, even going so far as to map them to fighting game motions as well. These skills are unlocked in a variety of different ways, all visualized in a brand new interface specifically dedicated to progression. New to Leifthrasir is the ability to power up your active and passive skills by spending phosons, and unlocking passive abilities by spending ability points, allowing you to customize each character to your own unique playstyle. Speaking of phosons, these are soul fragments that fly out of defeated enemies. In addition to spending phosons to power up your skills, you'll also be able to use them to grow fruit trees thanks to seeds you plant on the battlefield. Eating the fruit from these trees yields a huge amount of experience points, and the tutorials early on will really stress the importance of this mechanic. You can still get experience points by fighting enemies on the battlefield, of course, but you can just as easily get 5 levels ahead by eating fruits in the early parts of your character's story. Later down the line, you'll encounter a portable restaurant service that can take these fruits, along with the ingredients you'll find along the way, to make into more nourishing, meaning more experience-yielding, meals, further increasing your character's levels. By utilizing these systems to their fullest, see what I did there? You'll be able to stay at least 5 levels ahead of the many fights in the game, and you'll need it, especially with some of the tougher opponents later on. That said, balancing which aspect of the game's progression to spend phosons on, upgrading skills or leveling up, is an interesting choice to have to make on the regular, and a fine balance is required to be able to keep up with the game's challenges. Perhaps the biggest change in Odin Sphere Leifthrasir is to the game's alchemy system. George Kamitani, Odin Sphere's original director and one of Vanillaware's founders wanted to remove the Alchemy system altogether for this remaster. But, thanks to fans of the PS2 game who now work at the company, they convinced him that this feature could be streamlined and improved upon, leading to the system that's implemented in Leifthrasir. In its newest iteration, the Alchemy system allows and encourages all sorts of experimentation with ingredients and items well before you've officially received the recipes for said items. There's at least 2 or 3 different ways to alchemize an item, and you'll be able to preview what you're about to make thanks to the quality of life changes added to Leifthrasir. All in all, the alterations, upgrades, and improvements made to these and other systems in Odin Sphere Leifthrasir make for a game that has a considerable amount of depth over its original release, and I absolutely love it when I'm able to play an action game that not only allows me to experiment with a variety of different attacks and skills, but also one that encourages that kind of behavior in all other facets of the game. Even in its early years of development as a spiritual successor to Princess Crown, Odin Sphere was to have an improved version of the same multi-layered narrative style that was featured in the former. The game does this by letting you experience one character's story at a time until you reach the end of their tale. However, because of the necessity to piece the whole narrative together from 5 distinct storylines, it can be quite challenging to track the order of unfolding events. This is, despite the fact that there is a visual flowchart that you can refer to. One particular problem I encountered was when I was trying to figure out when a very important item would change hands at which part of the story. The flowchart unfortunately doesn't track small details such as these, instead offering a generalized version of the events that unfolded. Add to that the likelihood of having large gaps of time in between unfolding events, as well as missing scenes from certain characters' stories when they clearly meet one another, and this makes understanding Odin Sphere's entire narrative more difficult than it should be. Barring that, however, Odin Sphere's story is an otherworldly blend of Norse mythology with a dollop of Shakespearean tragedy. There's a recurring theme of overcoming one's fate that is peppered throughout the entirety of Odin Sphere. Much of the strength of its narrative comes from its 5 main protagonists, who each have their own agendas that propel them towards making choices, good or bad, that could potentially plunge their world into chaos. You will have no agency in making such decisions. However, Odin Sphere does place a very important set of decisions on you towards the end of the game that'll determine the fate of its characters. Each character's story unfolds in a pace that doesn't detract too much from the action, and these moments not only effectively move these stories forward, but also allow you to really get a grasp of each character's personalities quickly. There's both a succinctness and a kind of extravagance to Odin Sphere's dialogue that further convinces you that this is a world not of our own. And unlike many of the other attempts at this kind of writing in other games, the dialogue sounds as though it fits the motif well, as opposed to detracting from the entire experience. There's something beautifully poetic about Odin Sphere's characters' determination to alter their predestined fates, as it pertains to Vanillaware's desire to revisit said game, and Leifthrasir is all the better for it. However, Leifthrasir isn't just an excuse to retool the game's existing systems to make for a better gameplay experience. It's also an opportunity to diligently go over every single facet of the game's presentation, ultimately fulfilling its own ambitious goals that were set during its original release. This painstaking attention to detail is at the heart of why Odin Sphere Leifthrasir appeals to me very deeply. As soon as you start up the game, you're immediately enveloped in a lovingly crafted world that belies the tragedy and drama within, whisking you through its vibrant, colored visuals and presenting you with an innocent attic library where your journey begins. Perhaps one of the victims of having the ability to suspend PS4 games is that you won't be seeing the attic's inhabitants, Alice and her cat Socrates, that often anymore, given that you can just suspend a game at any point in the story and start it back up where you left off. However, there's a quieting calm that settles in when you see Alice enter the scene, prompting the player to read any of the books scattered on the floor, or spending some quality time with Socrates on the reading chair. It's one of those details that doesn't necessarily even have to be there. But it's these few simple interactions that make the whole experience ever so memorable. It's detail where the interactions count the most. Nothing excessive, just right. And yet this small sequence, one that you'll rarely encounter through your time with Odin Sphere Leifthrasir, represents the kind of meticulous and artful consideration that was involved with the creation of this game's presentation. So much so that every rendered sprite, pixel, and background feels so unbelievably inviting and bright that it's almost unimaginable that this all used to be packed in a PS2 game. In perhaps one of the most impressive foresights of video game conservation, many of the original game's art assets, at the time of Leifthrasir's development, were in fact still intact and preserved. What this means is that Leifthrasir utilizes the full original high-resolution art assets that George Kamitani created more than a decade ago. This brings to mind a contrast in situations between Leifthrasir and Square Enix's numerous attempts to remaster their PS1 Final Fantasy titles, whose original CG backgrounds have been lost to time. All that work doesn't even speak about Odin Sphere's overall art direction, which utilizes an animation style that's not too dissimilar from early Flash animation. The clever use of this technique makes Vanillaware's characters appear to have a lot more three-dimensional depth than what's actually present, and it's been the developer's signature style for quite some time now. One aspect of George Kamitani's character design that I've always found fascinating is how he renders the proportions of certain large-scale characters, featuring big, bulky chests supported by little tiny legs that harken back to the characters I've seen in old Looney Tunes cartoons. Odin Sphere's main protagonists also seem to have been designed with a specific set of accent colors in mind, which subconsciously remind us of each person's demeanor whenever they appear on screen. From a practical standpoint, these colors also help us easily tell them apart from the enemies on screen when chaos ensues, as some opponents are colored a bit less vibrant than the controllable characters. And unlike the original PS2 game, Leifthrasir isn't plagued with the slowdown issues that the original suffered from, at least when I played it on PS4. Providing the wonderful orchestral accompaniment are the folks at Bass Escape, led by composer Hitoshi Sakimoto of Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII fame. It's quite easy to hear Sakimoto's signature style in several of the songs featured in Odin Sphere, with some compositions feeling like extensions of some of the work he's done in the games mentioned. Leifthrasir adds 25 brand new tracks to the original soundtrack, with several being new arrangements of select songs from the original. These new arrangements are comparatively more complex in style than the original versions, often altering the feel of each movement found within the same song. It almost feels as though that these new arrangements are trying to impose upon the player the different feelings evoked by the location they're exploring, though oftentimes I question whether having such sophisticated tracks truly add to the experience or not. Some of these sweeping, powerful orchestral arrangements can dwindle down to a quiet ballad, dominated by a few instruments, only to burst into an energetic phrase filled with strong melodies, before taking it all back and resetting it to the sweeping melodies that the song started with. All told, when these melodies work, they work extremely well, but there are times that the complexity of the composition is so out there that it sometimes becomes distracting, like this one. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir's original iteration was so ambitious that it took almost 2 console generations to fully realize its final design, and it left me wanting more by the time I finished it. It occupies a small list of games that I wouldn't mind replaying over and over again, making me think of new ways to implement its skills and refine combat in ways that I've never thought before. It's in this sense that I partially think of Leifthrasir as a combat sandbox that I absolutely love tinkering around and playing with, that just happens to have an engaging story to tell that, while at times dark, takes you on an emotionally fulfilling journey. And with the inclusion of the original Odin Sphere, Leifthrasir is a complete package that not only appeals to the lover of historical context in me, but also shows a love and admiration to a game that propelled Vanillaware's popularity skyward, serving as a fitting introduction to anyone unfamiliar with their work. Not often can I say that a game can be one of the best games for 2 entire console generations, but that's what Odin Sphere Leifthrasir feels to me, whether you play it on the PS3, Vita, or PS4.